Greetings, YouTubers. Like to go over a few articles. It seems, of course, predictably, the long knives are out for Ron Paul. And the first article I'd like to go over is John Hawkins' rather very poor and generalized article, The Conservative Case Against Ron Paul. And I'll have all the relevant links underneath the video as per usual. And he says, Ron Paul is a libertarian, not a conservative. I don't know, not sure, no duh, what do you exactly mean like this? Although he is a small government guy, John says. He very poorly represents conservative opinion on a wide variety of other important issues, probably because he's not a conservative, as you mentioned. So that's rather generalized and nonsensical. Number two, he says Ron Paul is spreading the North American Union conspiracy. Well, I'm not going to comment on that much, except for Ron has been the most adamant supporter of legislation to get us out of the UN and kick them out. If there is a globalist agenda, the UN is part of it, as far as having global gun registration, global gun laws, global taxes, income taxes, global carbon taxes, control of the internet. The UN's in all that. So if you want to, I don't know what John's opinion is on the UN. Ron Paul has been very adamant at getting rid of the UN, and that would certainly stop their globalist agenda. They could operate somewhere else. I'm not sure what his opinion is on that, but that seems rather weak. Number three, Ron Paul encourages truther conspiracy nuts. He notes that Ron Paul is not a 9/11 truther, but he flirts with whack jobs in the truther movement. So I guess if John was running for president, and I don't know what his religious leanings are, but if he's a Christian and an atheist group endorsed his economic platform, would he run from them? Would he think it'd be fair if a conservative Christian group criticized him because he was flirting with atheists? It seems really desperate. Number four, he says Ron Paul's racial views. I have several links under there. He goes through this spiel that something Ron Paul allegedly wrote back in 1992. He concludes that Ron Paul has since claimed that although these comments were in his newsletter under his name, he didn't write them. Is he telling the truth? Who knows? Either way, those comments don't say much for Ron Paul. Except John, if he didn't write them. I don't know what this just seems rather desperate. Ron has been pointing out some very politically incorrect things, and so have I. There's links under the video. You can check some videos out I have done. Blacks per capita, now notice that's per capita, kill far more people than whites. Blacks are aborted more often than whites. Blacks are born out of wedlock a lot more than any other ethnic group. That's not a racist statement, that's just a truthful statement. And of course they're all going up. Since the rise of the welfare state under LBJ, they've all increased markedly. So, and again, you can read it all for yourself, but Ron Paul is, one thing I'm sure John opposes that Ron Paul is all for is Ron Paul wants to get rid of the war on drugs. Well, the war on drugs disproportionately hurts black people. So, John Hawkins, I don't think you know what you're talking about. Ron Paul would end the war on drugs, more blacks. I don't know if this is a racist thing or not, if blacks are arrested more often because it has a racial motivation, or they just tend to do drugs more. Either way, stopping the drug war, which has been an abject failure, would keep be a lot less black people in prison. Number five, he writes, a lot of Ron Paul supporters are incredibly irritating. So if I pointed out, John, that you're fat and irritating, and then I can use that against whoever you're backing, well, you see why that argument fails. He says Ron Paul's an isolationist. That's false. He would have supported going after Japan in World War II. He knows that's after World War II, that's when our foreign policy started becoming interventionist. And he also supported a mission into Afghanistan to get bin Laden. It doesn't necessarily mean we send as many troops as we have there, but he did support a mission to go into Afghanistan and get bin Laden. So he's not an isolationist. That's a straw man attack. Number seven, he writes, Ron Paul wants to immediately cut and run from Iraq. Well, he never wanted to even go to Iraq in the first place, so that's kind of a ridiculous statement. Although some people have argued who may have been against the war, well, we're there right now, let's finish it. But he was never for it in the first place. And I don't know, that could kind of gone under number 7, but I think he's grasping for some information here. He's trying to make this seem longer and more potent. Number 8, he writes, he's angry at Ron Paul, who has been pointing out this has been his standard spiel for a couple decades, that we don't need to be intervening in all these countries. We don't need troops in 100+ countries, spending tens of billions of dollars housing troops and maintaining bases in rich countries, and trying to keep the peace in Islamic hellholes like Libya. And Ron, I don't necessarily agree that they're attacking us because we're over there. I think they would hate us anyway, because they are Islamic, and I understand how Islam works. But so I think they'd still hate us. But I do think if our troops aren't over there, they can't kill our troops if they're not over there. And I would also point out our previous president, Bush, and the current one, Hussein Obama, are trying to get Israel to give up land. Ron Paul will not do that. Number 9, what's the last one here? He's got one more, I believe, yes. Number 9, Ron Paul is the single least electable major candidate running for the presidency. Of course, at the start of the article, he says Ron Paul is not a top-tier candidate, so now all of a sudden he's a major candidate. Actually, there's a Rasmussen poll, and I'll have that link under there. The likely Iowa caucus voters, Ron Paul was 3rd with 16%, and another national poll putting the Republican candidates up against Hussein Obama. Mitt Romney was beating Hussein Obama. Rick Perry was tied with him, and Ron Paul was within the margin of error, 2 points within Hussein Obama. So I don't think John Hawkins knows what he's talking about, to be honest. I think this is a polemic. He's just extremely angry and frustrated, and he threw this article together quickly, and it's the biggest pile of crap I've ever seen. I'd also add that pushing for the most electable candidate, that's what got us George W. Bush and John McCain. And how did that turn out? It turned out terrible. Spending, and more spending. Moving on, we'll go to David Catron's article. He wrote an article at Spectator, which actually makes a few good points against Ron Paul. One of the things I disagree with Ron on is earmarks. Ron says as long as earmarks are going to be continued to be airdropped into conference reports, and his taxpayers in his district will have to pay for earmarks in other districts, he's going to continue to request them. Now, if I was him, I don't like earmarks. They're a small part of the budget, but they're a problem, and it kind of emboldens the culture of spending like drunken sailors in Washington. So he criticizes Ron Paul on earmarks, which I agree with. Ron Paul should drop his support for them, but he goes off talking about these hundreds of millions in earmarks Ron's had over his entire career. You look at that in terms of the national debt and the spending, how it went up under Bush and Obama, and it's laughable. It'll be like me peeing in the ocean and raising sea levels. It's ridiculous. But I do agree, Ron Paul should drop his support for earmarks. The one good point he does make, in a roll call vote, Ron voted to implement price controls on prescription drugs. Under Medicare Part D, he voted for legislation that would allow the government, the health HHS, to negotiate drug prices with pharmaceuticals, and I disagree with that. And I was surprised that Ron voted for that, and I disagree with that. But of course, when you consider that Ron wants the government out of healthcare altogether, you put that up against it, it's not that big a deal. But I do admit that was a head scratcher that Ron would vote for that. He did vote to recommit that legislation to committee, recommit it, and that failed. But so it makes a good point there. But considering Ron Paul wants to shut down government involvement in healthcare altogether and urge states to deregulate their healthcare markets, I don't think that's a big deal. Next, he then goes off on Ron Paul for his letter he wrote to the Republican Party in 1987 when he left the Republican Party and he was frustrated. He supported Reagan, and then David saying, well, he turned his back on Reagan, and you read that letter, he does criticize Reagan a lot, and some of it makes sense. As far as the tax increases, and I've had a couple liberals pull this on me, if you raised and lowered the 2008 tax rates, corporate income, personal income, payroll taxes, Social Security and Medicare, capital gains taxes, federal fuel excise taxes, personal income taxes, I don't know, I probably named a couple of them twice, but if you raised and lowered all those by the same amount they were raised and lowered under Reagan, I would take that deal, because personal income taxes and corporate income tax rates would be a lot lower. Is it a perfect deal? No. Considering, Social Security is a whole other animal altogether, and I'll get to that at the end of this video. So Ron was upset about that. Ron also pointed out that we didn't shut down the Federal Department of Education, which is unconstitutional, and the Federal Department of Energy, which is probably unconstitutional as well and completely ineffective. He was upset about that. He pointed out that even after Reagan lowered taxes, the economy was booming and the government was bringing in money hand over fist, but the deficits continued. He wanted Reagan to use the veto more often, and it didn't happen. So he makes, just because he's criticizing Ronald Reagan, it seems like Mr. Catron is just getting himself up in a tizzy. But the deficits did continue, and they've been continued forever, even in the golden years of the Clinton administration. During the tech boom, the national debt was still going up. Even in Bush's best 3 fiscal years, when we brought in almost $7.5 trillion of revenue in 3 fiscal years, the debt still went up. Washington has a culture of spending more than they take in, and I'll also add they need to have the amount they get cut down as well. So I urge you to read that letter. In fact, it's going across your screen, where Ron Paul criticized. He also wants to get rid of foreign aid, which I agree is largely ineffective, and it allows corrupt regimes to continue. They spend money. That frees up money they can spend elsewhere. When if we didn't give it to them, they'd have to be more fiscally conservative themselves. He criticized Reagan for that as well. And I like I said, read it for yourself. I think most of the criticisms of the Republican Party then are fair. And then he's mad because David Catron's mad because Ron Paul, the Republican Party, let him back in. And actually they didn't let him back in. He just said, I'm running for Congress again. And the Republican primary voters nominated him, and he won the general election down there, and he's been there for some time, 24 years total, I think, if you count it all up. So I think David is being a little unfair there, and just because he's criticizing Reagan, well, we just go up in a tizzy. Read it, and a lot of it makes sense. Now we're going to get to something that will probably go over like a lead balloon: military spending. And this is where I think Ron Paul actually can be electable, because most Republicans aren't pointing out anything about defense spending, except they'll just cite waste, inefficiency, fraud, blah, 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 and that's it. Ron's pointing out things we actually can cut. And this ruffles a lot of feathers, but it must be said. You remember in the last debate where Rick Santorum was, or one of the recent debates, Rick Santorum was struggling for relevance, and he went after Ron Paul. And Ron differentiated between defense spending and military spending. Defense spending, what we spend here to defend ourselves, such as missile defense and our Navy. And military spending, what we spend overseas to protect rich European countries, Australia, which is actually taking some measures to build up their own defense, North Korea, Japan, over 100 countries, around 130. We could cut a lot from that. I'll point out, and this isn't very popular, and I'll draw an analogy here. Whenever I say the Department of Education is unconstitutional, people, a lot of these idiots out there who have always seen a federal Department of Education don't know how to react without it. So when they find out it's unconstitutional, it's like, well, we don't care about the Constitution. We've always had the Department of Education. We need to keep it. Just like when I point out that a perpetual large standing army is not constitutional except for 2 years when you need it, which means I'm not saying get rid of the army, obviously not. I'm not saying get rid of the Pentagon, obviously not. The Navy is supposed to be maintained year-round and powerful as it is to defend our country, not all these other countries. Now, if there's an incursion, like in 1991, we ran Saddam out of Kuwait, fine. But we don't need a perpetual large standing army. It's unconstitutional. Under LBJ and Kennedy, when we had that build-up for Vietnam, defense spending was running wild. In that war, we went over to Vietnam without congressional authorization, by the way. A Democrat Congress refused to do anything about it. Kennedy and LBJ got us into that war. And after that ended, defense spending started declining against the rate of inflation. And by 1980, it had gotten down to a manageable level. Then under Reagan, it started building up again. And our Army levels of active members and reserve members. Now, National Guard, that's different. We could use them in the event we need to defend this country or run a dictator out of a country. But we don't need all these active and reserve members. And under Reagan, it started to increase. And then after the Soviet Union collapsed, it started decreasing slowly. Actually, it was decreasing even before the Soviet Union collapsed. And then it continued to decrease slowly under Clinton. And then when George W. Bush got in office, it started going up again. So he points out, the points he makes there, they're correct. I mean, there's really no logical argument against it other than you've always seen the Army be extremely large and bloated, and we've got to continue doing that. No, we don't. Again, I differentiate between the Army and the Navy. The Navy is perpetual, always maintained, always powerful. I'm not saying get rid of the Army, but we could cut the fat, so to speak. And that's one of the most unpopular, at least in Republican circles, one of Ron Paul's points. We don't need to be defending all these countries overseas. And a lot of people have a problem with that. And, I understand, but once you get past, you have to get out of that paradigm of thinking that this is the way it is, because that's not constitutional. So I think we can cut a lot from defense spending without sacrificing security. And another thing Ron Paul will appeal to voters with, he will be able to hammer Obama on the Patriot Act, because Obama talked out of both sides of his mouth on it. He's reauthorized it several times. Ron Paul's never voted for it. I don't know who John Hawkins or David Catron's voting for. Are they voting for Michelle Bachmann, who backs the Patriot Act? Rick Santorum will. Patriot Act is unconstitutional. It is a violation of the Fourth Amendment in many cases. So, look at the troop levels. Look how they've fluctuated. That's money we could save without sacrificing security. And now to our, speaking of security, or income insecurity, my last spiel will be on Social Security, which is another thing Ron Paul wants to reform out of existence. Now let's talk about Social Security for a minute. You remember when Mitt Romney called Social Security a criminal enterprise? You may or may not. That doesn't sound very good. But when Rick Perry started hammering away on it, being a Ponzi scheme, which it is, it was rather pathetic to see Bachmann and Romney go after him, because they're worried about, they're buying votes, they're vote buyers, and they're worried about scaring somebody, and if we got to get these focus groups going here, and if this isn't popular, if this isn't a popular position, we shouldn't take it. So Romney's a populist anyway. He can't make up his mind on social issues. He likes assault weapon bans, affirmative action. He loves socialized medicine. If Mitt Romney gets the nomination, I will not vote for him. I will vote third party. Newt Gingrich, if he gets the nomination, I will vote third party as well. I figure, and no offense to anyone, nothing personal, but if the Republican Party is dumb enough to nominate one of those two idiots, it will get what it deserves. So Rick Perry channels Ron Paul and many others saying Social Security is a Ponzi scheme, and Bachmann and Romney are going berserk, and you got people like the phony doctor McStupid over there going berserk because Social Security, she relies on that, and which will be most of her income. But Social Security is a Ponzi scheme, because if it was run like it was supposed to be, then I should be able to opt out of it. But they won't let me because they need that money to pay off the current retirees. And we need over $300 billion per year from 2014 to 2083 to cover the shortfalls. and that's including assuming we don't change anything and like give people under 40 the option of opting out, so we'll have to cut a lot of spending. We're in serious trouble. And then when you consider from 1950 to 1975, payroll taxes pertaining to Social Security, employer and employee combined, increased by well over 300% between 1950 and 1975. OASDI still ran a deficit from 1976 to 1983. This was long before the baby boomers even got close to retirement. In fact, some of them weren't even in the workforce yet. And then when you consider with Social Security, even in good times, look what's up on your screen. Social Security spending in constant dollars is increasing rapidly even when the economy's good and even before the baby boomers get out. We cannot handle this. Something's got to give. We could fix Social Security pretty quickly. Just raise the retirement age to 80, which is above the life expectancy of most people. Which is where it was when FDR started. Everybody thought, oh, this is a great idea. You all got shafted. You bent over and grabbed the ankles for big government, because the age where you would collect benefits was past where most people would live. Woo! Sounds like a great system. You got hosed, every one of you. We all got. I don't want to use a dirty term here, but we got shafted. So what we're gonna, and then if you just got out of college in the late 30s and started your business, you were getting shafted by Social Security. So they're going to have to raise the retirement age. They're going to have to cut benefits. They're going to do everything they can, and it's going to kick the can down the road. Sooner or later, you're going to get to a wall, and you're not going to be able to kick that can any further. So Social Security must be reformed out of existence. We must cut anything that we can cut, and that includes defense, to pay for the current people who are over 40. Those under 40 should be able to opt out. It's a Ponzi scheme, and it must be stopped. So, in conclusion, I think Ron Paul's the best candidate, and some Republicans are scared of him because he's not politically correct enough. And if I had $1 for every person I've talked to that said, I like Ron Paul, but he's not going to win, if they all went to the caucus and voted for him, he can win. So that's my spiel for the day. Ron Paul 2012.